Hello, everyone, and today we're going to be talking about developing your annotated bibliography and citing an APA. So now that you have your thesis, your research question, and your outline, you now have some level of a basis to begin your research. And unlike past research where you've had to create a bibliography, we're going to make what's known as an annotated bibliography this time. So what is an annotated bibliography? In past papers, you have had to complete research for your papers to support your arguments. And an annotated bibliography is simply a more involved bibliography. Unlike other bibliographies, which will only have the citation, an annotated bibliography citation has two parts: the citation itself and a paragraph in which there is a description of the article or source itself. This citation is created the same way as your previous citations by following the guidelines for your paper style. In this case, we'll be using APA, and we'll be talking about how to create an APA citation in just a little bit. An annotated bibliography is the list of citations to books, articles, and documents, and more types of sources, to be honest. These citations will include a brief paragraph afterwards elaborating on the article or source that you create. This paragraph is short, generally about 150 words, and serves as both a descriptor and an explanation for the source. But the main goals of these paragraphs, these explanations of these sources, is to give the reader relevancy for the work itself, why that work was included, to explain why that work is accurate to what you're wanting to research, and to really talk about the quality of that source. Both of these parts will then come together to form a citation, and I actually have this citation from Cornell University on another page, on another slide, but you can see how it has, You can see how up above it has the actual citation of Goldenschneider and Wicksburg and White. Non-family living and the erosion of traditional family orientation amongst young adults. Excuse me, I apologize. And you can see how towards the bottom we have our paragraph, which describes the article itself. So it talks about the authors, who are researchers at the Rand Corporation and Brown University. It talks about their methods, how they used data from national longitudinal surveys, and it talks about the results of said paper. This is going to be your primary goal, is to communicate why that paper is relevant and what details are in that paper that either help your argument or will be used in your argument. So you'll want to really dive into the sources that you choose in order to better understand them and write about them. We'll talk a little bit more about what sources you need for your paper towards the end, but let's go ahead and let's switch gears and let's talk about citing an APA. Citing an APA is very simple and will generally function the same way we've cited works in other papers. We'll go over in-text citations next week, as we don't need them for the annotated bibliography. But we'll go over those next week whenever we talk about writing your rough draft and formatting your rough draft. Now, general rules for citing an APA. All authors should be placed last name, first initial. You don't have to include first names in citations. Last name, first initial, or last name, first initial, second middle initial, works wonders. All lines after the first in a citation should be indented half an inch. So the first line will have a normal indentation, and then the second line would be indented by that half inch. Titles, if you are citing something like a book or an article should be italicized, except for shorter titles like chapter works. Those chapters would not be italicized if you were citing a specific chapter in a book. The title of the book itself, though, would be italicized. Now let's talk about how citations work for these different sources. So whenever it comes to citing a single author, article, or book, you're going to want to include the last name and first initial, the year published in parentheses, the title italicized, and the publisher of said article or book. If you're wanting to cite an encyclopedia or a dictionary, you'll want to include the institution or organization's name, the year that encyclopedia or dictionary was published, the title of the entry, the title of the reference work and edition page numbers, and the publisher's name. For an article or a journal, especially one that's placed online, you'll want to include the author and their first initial, the year that source is published. The title of the article, you'll want to include that in italics. The title of the periodical article or the journal that it was posted in, with the volume number and issue number being placed next, and what pages that your information comes from. If you are getting this from online, you'll also want to include some form of a link back to the article's database entry, the DOI. For a web page, you'll want to include last name, first name, and middle initial if that's present, the year, month, and date that you accessed this website, the title of the page, the site name, and the URL to that website. For any form of film or video, whether this be a documentary or a movie, you'll want to include the director's last name and the director's first names with director being in parentheses. The date of publication for that film comes next. Then comes the title of the motion picture and what type of media it is, so film, documentary. And then you'll also want to place the production company at the very end. And these are the main sources that I can expect to see you using for this type of essay. So you'll probably access an article, you'll probably access a web page, you'll probably access some form of a documentary, potentially about your source. But don't forget that if you don't see your type of source listed, you can check in with Purdue's Writing Lab to learn how to cite that source, and I will include that link that gives you the whole guidelines for APA and citing in APA. Lastly, let's go ahead and let's talk about what's needed for your paper. This is going to be what's needed for your annotated bibliography. Bibliography 2. So for your paper, you'll need a minimum of 6 citations for your research essay. 3 of these 6 sources need to be scholarly. Please be sure to reference the scholarly versus non-scholarly source reference sheet on ThinkWave but scholarly sources, keep in mind, will generally come from an expert or a professional organization in the field. These will generally be found in some form of a library database, Google Scholar, or on the organization's website itself. And I need 3 of these sources to be some form of a scholarly source. To simplify and just kind of remind you again, for your paragraph, each source in your annotated bibliography should state what the source is about, the main points that source presents, and the conclusion it reaches. Those are the 3 main things that you should be aiming to include in your paragraphs for these types of citations. Don't be afraid to mess up a citation, because the annotated bibliography will also allow me to check your citations, see if there's any issues with them, and advise potential changes to these citations. Excuse me, I apologize for that. That's a Discord bleep. I believe that's it. But with that will be it for now. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. My phone number and my email address will be placed in the assignment itself. And I will see you guys next week. Have a good rest of your week.